Alright, so in this video we're going to take a look at tying an adult midge pattern, and that's just what I've named it, adult midge. Um, so to do this we're going to use a size 16 dry fly hook, straight eye, and obviously you're probably going to want to tie a bit smaller, usually 18, 20, even 22. But this specific pattern is actually imitating a single midge adult rather than a cluster, which you see a lot of times. So we're just using A-dot uni thread, but black, but you can use any color to match the natural. And all we're doing here is just tying the abdomen. The abdomen on this fly is just thread. And I usually go back and forth maybe twice, just to give it a nice clean profile. And using tie thread for the abdomen is really useful when you're getting down to the size, 20, maybe even 22 size hooks. So we're just going to stop about a third of the way from the eye hook. And this is where we'll add in our other materials, which is just going to be, in this case, antron, white antron for the wings. There's a couple materials you can use on the second fly. We'll actually use some CDC. So just some antron, and you don't need a whole lot. I'm going to tease this apart, get what I want. But we'll be tying in antron, some grizzly hackle, or any other of the fine rooster hackle. Because the hackle is really what's going to keep this fly on the water, especially with just using antron for the wings. So we'll tie this right in front of that thread thorax, or thread abdomen, excuse me. And just set it on top of the hook shank. And then the final material that we'll use for the thorax is just going to be some dubbing. And honestly, if you're tying really small, if you're getting into the 22 or smaller, just thread on the abdomens. Usually what I go with. So we got that, and we'll just leave it how it is. We'll come back and we'll trim that up a little later. And you can use it as just kind of that single piece, or you can even do kind of a figure 8 method and split that into 2 distinct wings. Here's our grizzly hackle. I like to trim a few fibers from the end of the stem, and that just helps making it a little cleaner tying it in. We don't have fibers going off in odd directions. And then I also like to kind of just flare out some of the fibers from the stem. I think it helps them, their direction, their orientation a little better when you're wrapping. Let's tie this in. And now we're going to add a little dubbing. For this case, I'm actually going to use some peacock ice dub. And that's not as good for repelling water as maybe like a microfine, but I really like the flash that it gives. And that little bit of flash always seems to do really well for me when I'm fishing a midge pattern. And it's just a direct dubbing. And I usually like to take one wrap underneath that antron, whatever other wing material you're using. And I just think it helps stabilize, and I like kind of giving it a little more height coming off and not just laying flat on the back of your hook. So once we have that, we're going to wrap our grizzly hackle. And I like to get quite a few wraps in. I'll try to get 6 or 7. And you'll do a little less on smaller flies, but especially if you want it to ride a little higher in the surface film, you need your hackle will be pretty dense. Uh, and you definitely want really fine hackle fibers for this fly. So let's do some wraps and tie this off. Now I didn't do a very good job tying that off. I caught a few fibers that I'm going to have to trim. Once you have that, you can form a little head. There we go. And just a quick whip finish. And then we can trim our wings back here. So if you look at adult midges, their wings usually don't extend past their bodies. So we're just going to go up from the end of our tying thread and trim that off. And there you go. That's a really simple, slim profile adult midge. And again, this is imitating, a single adult, not really a cluster of midges. And with the materials that are being used, you can tie this pretty small, which sometimes is needed with some of these midge hatches. We'll do a second one here, and we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to try a new wing material. And with this fly, this is one of my favorite flies during a midge hatch if I'm really trying to get up close to the fish and be stealthy. Have some really light tippet, and I like to use this on a little calmer waters. It just lets me see the fly a little better. But using this, getting up close to the fish and really fishing to specific rises that I see is how I've been more effective using this adult midge. Just form the abdomen really quickly. In our CDC. And actually what I really like to use CDC wise on these flies are the CDC puffs, just because they're equal length, and I can, especially with smaller flies, I can kind of cut off the amount that I really want and have a nice even length without having to do any extra work. Trim some of these fibers off. And tie it on top of the hook shank just like we did with the Antron. Just tie it right back to the front of that abdomen. Trim off the excess, sorry. All right. Now we got our grizzly hackle. And I've seen quite a few patterns where this is just about the whole fly, without even the hackle. Just doing a little abdomen here with that CDC coming off. And I see that mostly when you're tying really, really small. But a lot of people tie them. I've never done much with that specific pattern. I usually like a little hackle in mine. But when you get with such small flies, I mean, if you're getting smaller than size 22, you're a lot more limited on the amount of materials that you're able to tie in. On this one, I'm just using some microfine dubbing, which sheds water or resists getting waterlogged a lot better than the peacock ice dub that we used on the first fly. But light tippet is definitely the way to go with these flies. And I've also done much better fishing these up close. Um, if you're trying to fish these things 30 yards out, it's going to be really tough. Like I said, it's try to get in behind the fish, use a little stealth, and really fish to specific flies. I think is the best way to utilize this pattern. Again, we're going to trim off our CDC. Form a little head. Trim these fibers I caught. And then whip finish. And that's really all there is to this adult midge. Again, it's a good, simple little pattern to imitate a single adult. Trim up a little bit. So you also want to be sure your hackle, you're using the right size hackle. So this hackle is a bit larger um, for this size fly than I would want. But that's all right. You get the idea. So there it is. Super simple pattern. Be sure to check out our other videos that look at some of the different stages of the midge life cycle.